What are the bad ones? What am I allowed to eat? What can I eat? My doctor told me I'm never allowed to eat potatoes again. So there's just a lot of information out there. And hopefully, our hour together today is going to provide a little bit of clarity and hopefully a little bit of calm around carbohydrates so that we just have a clearer understanding about the function that they serve in our bodies and how to incorporate them into our diet and lifestyle in a healthy way. So always, there we go. Lowdown on carbs. This is kind of our overview of what we're going to talk about today, really kind of debunking this idea of good versus bad. We don't need to dichotomize carbohydrates into two distinct categories, even though that's commonly how society presents them. We're going to talk about what the function of carbohydrates are within our bodies and our health processes. Talk about how much we need, which is really individualized for the person. So there really isn't a hard and fast rule there. And then how we can incorporate them into our daily lives so that we can really maximize their health benefit. So can they be divided into two distinct columns? Simple answer is no. Commonly, though, when we think about what a good carbohydrate is, we hear terms like it's a whole grain, it has high fiber, it's fiber rich, a lot about, oh, gluten-free carbs are better for us. We lump fruit and vegetables all together to say those are good carbs. But then depending on who you're talking to, you might have somebody who's doing keto and saying, well, no, fruits are bad carbs because they have more. And so there's just a lot of hazy gray area. And so simply put, no, we cannot say that there are two distinct good and bad carbs because carbs are made up of more than just one thing. Carbohydrates are made up of sugars, starches, fibers, and depending on the context of the meal, depending on what our day looks like, right? A marathon runner who's going to be going 26 miles is going to need some carbs. Those are not bad carbs. They need them to survive versus somebody like myself, I sit in my office all day. The same amount of carbs as that marathon runner, but does that make them good versus bad? It's really a lot more about context and understanding what are in the different foods that we're eating, how much of these things do we need, and really why are we eating them? If we think about carbs as energy, we really want to match what type of energy and how much energy we're bringing in to match how much we're expending. And so no, there's no such thing as good and bad carbs, and we're really going to dive into that today. So they're not all created equal. There are so many foods out there that have carbohydrates. Simply put, anything that grows out of the ground can or does have carbohydrates. So we think about fruits and vegetables. They grow in bushes and trees, vines, they grow out of the ground. Nuts and seeds, these things grow on trees or they grow under the ground. We think about things like an avocado. Guess what? It's a plant. We are going to be consuming carbs as long as we're eating plant-based foods. One exception to this rule, of course, is milk. Milk does have carbohydrates. It does not grow out of the ground. It comes from our cows or from wherever we're getting our milk from, but that would be the one exception to the rule. So not all carb sources are equal, and we can't just say all carbs are bad because depending on the type of carb, what type of plant it is, what type of food it is, it's going to give us different nutrients. And not just different types of carbs, meaning fiber versus sugar, for example, but also different micronutrients. So nuts and seeds are going to give us a different spectrum of vitamins and minerals than something like the food group of fruits. Also a carbohydrate. It's going to give us different vitamins and minerals, and our body really needs all of them. So it's really important that we're incorporating all carbs, highest quality, into our diets from all of these different food groups. So when we think about kind of overarching themes, how to incorporate these carbs into our diet, one is we need to be looking at moderation and balance, right? We don't want to be eating more carbs than our body needs or can use in a day. And then within those different food groups, we definitely want to get a moderate amount of each one of them so that we have that balanced intake. We want to understand their impact. So understanding from a specific blood sugar perspective. If we were to eat carbs from broccoli versus carbs from a banana, both of them are going to provide carbs, but they are going to lead to different blood glucose responses, which we'll dive into a little later as well. And then learning the importance of when and how to incorporate them. So again, my example of I sit in an office most of my day. Well, at lunch, I might not need to have a plate of pasta for lunch because a plate of pasta is going to give me a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of good energy. that I'm not going to necessarily be able to put to use the second half of my day if I'm sitting in front of a computer. But something like a construction worker who's going to be on his or her feet all day doing work 8, 10, 12 hours, well, that plate of pasta for lunch is absolutely an appropriate choice because they're going to be able to put all of that energy to use the second half of their work shift when they're on their feet, they're moving things, they're being active. So it's really understanding not just what type of carbs and how much carbs, but then also when am I eating those carbs to match my needs. So those main carbs in the diet, we're most familiar with our starches. We think of our breads, our rices, our pastas, fruits and fruit juices. Really any fruit is going to provide us a carbohydrate source. Milk, milk substitutes. So we think of things like soy milk, not necessarily a dairy milk, it's a nut milk, but those milk substitutes can also be a source of carbohydrate. And then our yogurt. Non-starchy vegetables, or really any vegetable, right? So a lot of times people will put potatoes in their vegetable column. You will see I have that included under starches, but all vegetables, because guess what? All vegetables come out of the ground. Anything that grows out of the ground is going to provide us a source of carbohydrate. And then obviously our sweets and desserts. These are going to be things that contain sugar, sugar being a type of carbohydrate. Now, each one of these different food groups or different categories where they might provide us carbs are going to provide us a different amount of carbs. So we think of something like our starches and our fruits are going to provide us significantly more carbohydrate per serving than our non-starchy vegetables. And then to dig a little deeper within each of these food groups, we're going to be getting different types of carbs. So something like our sweets and desserts are more likely to provide us sugar-based carbs, whereas those non-starchy vegetables are going to provide us fiber-based carbs. And so also, all carbs are not created equal. How much of it am I getting and what type is it are both going to impact our blood sugar response and our overall health. So we're going to take a look at a couple different plates. These are all widely studied and helpful depending on which meal plan you choose to best match your family's needs and your overall health. You'll see here my plate. This is our overarching government recommended healthy eating plan. And I want to call out that 4 of those 5 food groups that are listed on that plate are carbohydrates. Dairy is a carb, grains are a carb, fruits and veggies are both carbs. The only thing on there is going to be your protein, which as long as you are not adding anything to it, we think of something like breaded chicken, but any type of animal-based protein, so your chicken, your pork, your seafood, your steak, your eggs, your bacon, any of those animal-based protein sources inherently do not have any carbohydrates, unless, of course, we bread that fish or we bread that chicken or we stuff that pork chop. But 4 of these 5 food groups are carbohydrates. And so this is a widely studied and can be helpful eating plan. It's based on carbs. And then when we look at something like a plant-based meal plan, every single one of these things that's listed is a carbohydrate, for the exception of water. But you've got your vegetables, you've got your fruits, your beans and legumes, your whole grains, your nuts, your seeds, your avocados. These are all carbohydrate-based foods because they're all plant-based foods. This is also a very good nutritional plan to follow if it, of course, matches all of your other needs and family preferences. But this is a carbohydrate-based plan. If we look at the diabetes plate, this is also heavy in carbohydrates. We see that aside from the protein, everything else that's listed as a carb food. So again, we really can't say good carbs, bad carbs, carbs are all bad, because if we label all carbs as bad, we're going to be removing pretty much everything except from protein from our diet. So it's important that we see over and over and over again that these really strongly studied eating plans, Mediterranean diet, tops the list of healthiest and best eating plans year after year after year. Veggies, whole grain starches, beans, nuts, seeds, these are all carb foods. You can see that their protein slice is even smaller than the My Plate. So this plan is even more based in plant-based, carb-based foods. So again, if anything you get out of today is we can't just say good, bad. There's no such thing as a good carb, bad carb. It's really understanding the implications and how we can build these into our overall daily choices to really maximize on the carbs that we're consuming. I just thought it was important for everyone to see that there are a lot of different eating plans out there that are widely studied and shown to be helpful whether that be for managing blood sugars, managing weight. Mediterranean diet really strongly associated with strong heart health outcomes. Carbs are not something that we have to vilify wholly. We just need to learn more about them and dig a little deeper. So what does that look like? Now my screen, there we go. Carbs are not the enemy. Hopefully you're taking that away from what I'm saying. They are a source of energy. So in the same way that you stop at Quick Trip or BP to fill up your gas tank so you can drive your car, carbs are our body's main and preferred fuel source. Brain cells and red blood cells run exclusively on blood glucose, which we get primarily from carbohydrate-based foods. So we need to make sure that we're not completely throwing them out the window and understanding that they do serve a function in our body. Now, do most Americans consume more carbs than we need? Are we overfilling our gas tank? Yes, that can happen on the standard American diet. More highly processed foods, we're getting away from those whole foods, not enough vegetables. So we're filling up our plate with just higher carb items, things that per serving are just going to give us more or fill up our tank more than we might be using. We need to keep in mind that we don't want to remove them completely. We've got to figure out how to fit them in the right amount. Another thing I hear is that sugar makes me fat. If I go on a low carb diet, I lose weight. Well, yes, that can work because ultimately, what are you doing? You're removing a significant portion of excess calories from your diet. Because how many times do we sit down to watch a movie and munch on a chicken breast? Now, you're going to sit down on a movie and you're going to eat some popcorn or you're going to eat some pretzel. Or if you're hanging around the office or let's say you're working from home and you're one of those people that kind of keep snacks around the desk, well, we're more likely to keep things like grapes or candy or pretzels or chips. We're not munching all the time on celery sticks. We're not munching on hard-boiled eggs all day long. And so when we cut a lot of those carbs out, you're removing a lot of calories that you might not even be aware that you're eating. And so over the course of weeks or months, without having consumed those excess calories, your weight starts to come down. But sugar doesn't make us fat. An excess of anything, if you were to sit down and eat too many chicken breasts, too many eggs, too much celery, which is really hard, but too much of these things, and we consume more calories than our body expends, you're going to gain weight. It's just that it's really easy to do that on a lot of common carbohydrate foods because a lot of our snacks and a lot of our meals can be based heavily in high starch or highly processed carb foods, whether that be those snacky type items, sweets, desserts, rices, pastas. Again, these foods are not bad. It's just that it's really, really easy to overdo it and to overfill our tank without even being aware of it. And so a lot of times it's just easier to vilify that food rather than saying, okay, let me learn how I can incorporate that in to meet my needs so that it's not a detriment to my health. When we talk about carbohydrate categories, for folks that do like to kind of see it as more organized fashion, you can kind of lump them into processed or simple carbs, whole or complex carbs. And when we talk about these as two separate categories, it's not to say that simple carbs are bad and complex carbs are good, because too much of either of them can be a problem. But also, simple carbs, like let's say birthday cake, would be considered a simple carbohydrate. A healthy relationship with food probably includes a slice of birthday cake on your birthday. It happens once a year. That's when you eat birthday cake. It's in the name. For us to eat birthday cake 365 might be a little harder to build into an overall healthy relationship with food and overall healthy diet. But I don't want you to see these as good versus bad categories, just kind of understanding, well, when we put foods into carbs or we're trying to organize them in our brains, simple carbohydrates or more processed carbohydrates have one blood sugar response and one satiety response, meaning they keep us fuller for less time, versus our whole or complex carbohydrates have a better blood sugar response. They also help to keep us fuller for longer. So maybe we don't need to go back and snack, or we don't need to have as large of a second helping or something like that. So there's one way to kind of categorize for folks that do like to kind of think of things in more organized fashions, but this does not equate to all good or all bad, because I want you to remember the birthday cake. On your birthday is the time to eat the birthday cake. Doesn't make it bad. So when we think about carbs even a little deeper, right? So we've maybe categorized them into two because that works for us. Well, we also need to understand that carbohydrate is an umbrella term that encompasses the three main types of carbs. We'll see sugar carbs, starch carbs, and fiber carbs. And you'll see on the graph on the bottom, depending on the type of carbohydrate we consume, we're going to have a different blood sugar response, simply based on how our body converts that carb food into blood sugar. All carbs can be turned into blood sugars. So you'll see that sugar carbs, whether that be something like soda, that's a piece of hard candy, a cookie, something that's just going to have a much higher sugar content. Because the sugar compound, if we were to look at it under a microscope, teeny, teeny, tiny, when it enters into our digestive system, our body sees it as this simple, easily digested compound. And so we break it down, convert it to blood sugar. It happens very rapidly. So that's where we see that blue blood sugar response. Blood sugar can go up very quickly. Whereas starch carbs, these are things that are going to be your pastas, your rices, your potatoes, your breads, your traditional starch-based foods. Well, if we were to look at starch underneath a microscope, it's a little bit bigger of a compound compared to sugar. And so when it gets into our digestive system and our body starts working on it, it's going to take a little bit longer to break down that larger compound into digestible pieces and therefore be able to be converted to blood sugars. And so you'll see that green blood sugar response. It doesn't go up nearly as fast or as high, and then it lasts a little bit longer because it's taking the body longer to break down that starch food, to digest it, convert it to blood sugar, and use it. And then dietary fiber carbs. These are things like our non-starchy vegetables. We see dietary fiber in things like our nuts and seeds. Well, dietary fiber would be the largest of those compounds underneath the microscope. And so it's going to take the body the most time, the most energy to break that down into digestible pieces and potentially convert it to blood sugars, where you'll see that yellow hump on the graph. Fiber is going to last the longest. It's going to create the lowest blood sugar response. And so it's understanding that not all carbs are bad. It's just understanding how they're going to respond in our body. So if you're going to consume a sugar-based carb, well, I know that it has the potential to turn into blood sugar very rapidly. So what steps can I take to either slow that down to prevent it from getting as high, which we'll talk about in a little bit, versus our fiber carbs, we might have a little more wiggle room. So that's where when we say, eat all the veggies that you want within your recommendation, because those vegetables, where they're very low in calories inherently, they're also the lowest in total carbohydrates. And of those carbs that we're eating, they're primarily dietary fiber. So they're going to have the least significant or negative impact on our blood sugars. Okay. So depending on the food, it's going to have one or all three of these types of carbohydrates. We think of something like, you see there, soda. Soda's all sugar carbs, which is why it creates the biggest blood sugar response. But fruit is also a source of sugar carbs. It's what makes it sweet. So when we look at something like a banana is going to have some starch carbs and some sugar carbs. Whereas if we were to look at a higher fiber type fruit, let's say something like blackberries have a very high fiber content, but they're also a source of sugar. And so we're going to get a mix and match of one, two, or all three of these, depending on the food, which again goes back to, you can't just say these are good foods, these are bad foods, because it really depends on what's in that food, when am I eating it, what am I eating with it, how much am I eating, so much more than just good versus bad. Sarah, did we lose, was somebody muted? I'm hearing some back.
Yeah, I'm trying to find them, Tatiana. I'm working on it.
Okay. All right. So talking about those different types of carbohydrates, let's go a little deeper into that glycemic index. This is a really common topic. And a lot of folks will say, well, I'm on a low glycemic index diet, or I'm trying to eat more low glycemic index foods. And basically what they're saying is they're trying to choose foods that are going to create a less significant rise in blood sugar. A low glycemic index food is going to, as you can see on that graph, create a lower blood sugar response than a high glycemic index food that's going to have a much more significant and fast impact on blood sugar rise just based on that digestibility of the carb source and how quickly the body can convert it to blood sugars. Glycemic load is a less common topic, but equally as important because it takes into account the portion of food. So if we look at something like watermelon or potatoes, these are considered high glycemic index foods on the glycemic index list. But when we look at a standard serving of these foods, their glycemic load is actually low to medium, considering the portion that we consume, portion we should be consuming. If we sit around and eat 4, 5, 6 cups of watermelon, well, now the glycemic index and the glycemic load are both high, and so you're going to see a very significant impact on your blood sugars. But if we were to eat a higher glycemic index food in a smaller portion, that glycemic load is now taken into effect and therefore will impact those blood sugars. Glycemic index is not an end-all be-all in terms of managing blood sugars. And if you eat all low glycemic index foods, it doesn't necessarily mean that your blood sugars are going to be well managed, that you're going to lose weight. Again, not an end-all be-all, but it is something to consider for those that are interested in it. Choosing lower glycemic index foods can be one strategy to incorporate into all of your dietary options to help prevent those blood sugar spikes. But there are other things that can impact that glycemic index. So we're going to use that potato, for example. It is considered a higher glycemic index food. When you eat that potato with its skin, which is dietary fiber, that can help to slow down its impact. When you eat that potato with a protein and a fat source, because protein and fat digest at a slower rate than carbs do, that helps to lower its glycemic index or helps to lower its impact on our blood sugars so we don't see such a significant rise. So we want to be mindful that, again, we can't just be looking at these carbs in a singular vacuum to say good versus bad, that there are other considerations that we can be taking into account. Overall, those simple carbohydrates or those more processed carbohydrates will generally have a higher glycemic index, meaning they're going to be digested more quickly. They are going to turn into blood sugar at a faster rate. They're going to empty out of your stomach faster, therefore leaving you hungry sooner, which you might very well then be going back to snack or to pick on things because you're hungry again, versus focusing on more of the complex whole food carbohydrates. We think of whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, whole nuts and seeds. Well, these are generally going to have a lower glycemic index, therefore converting to blood sugar at a slower rate, taking longer to digest, taking longer to empty out of your stomach, leaving you fuller longer, and you might not be as hungry as quickly because of those factors. Okay, so again, more information that we can't just look at these carbs within a vacuum, that we really need to be looking at them from a holistic, whole view of not just what am I eating, how much am I eating, when am I eating it, what am I eating with it, why am I eating it. All of those go into our selections around carbs. So all carbs can fit as long as we're taking those different factors into account. So digging a little bit into our further considerations, portion size, and you're going to see me, I'm going to pull out some food models here so that we can see what these portions are. Now, a portion size can be different for different folks, going back to myself versus that construction worker. A portion of pasta for me versus a portion of pasta for, let's say, he's a gentleman, he's 6'2", I'm not, he's obviously more active. His portion of pasta is more appropriately larger than mine because his fuel tank is bigger. He's going to need more of it than I would. So please keep that in mind, that the portion really is independent to the person, which is one of the benefits to meeting with a dietitian or, doing a little digger dive into your individual needs. But just to give you an idea about some common portions of different carb foods, I have some food groups here, or some food models, and I'm going to show you. So in terms of grains, we'll start with this. This right here is noodles, fake noodles, obviously. And this is equivalent to about 1 cup of cooked pasta, or think about it as cooked rice. For folks that are on this webinar today and that are counting carbohydrates, this 1 cup of cooked noodles equates to 45 grams of carbohydrates. For a lot of people, especially as we get older and especially as we're not as active, 45 carbs per meal isn't totally off the mark. So this 1 cup of noodles might meet some of your needs for an entire meal. And let's get real, how many of us are just eating this 1 cup of noodles? This isn't going to satisfy. So that's where we have to ask ourselves, what else am I eating with it? If I'm only relying on spaghetti to fill me up at a meal, this probably isn't going to do it. But if I can incorporate balance, I can go back to those different meal or those different plates that are showing let's incorporate nuts and seeds, let's incorporate vegetables, let's incorporate proteins. Well, now maybe this 1 cup, 45 carbs, is totally appropriate and satisfies. For fruit, do know that portions are not, or I should say servings are not always a single hand fruit. A lot of times our fruits, whether that be a single apple, a single orange, a single banana, well, they come as one package. That doesn't make them one serving or one portion. So in terms of carbs for a standard sized banana, it actually counts as 2 carb servings or 2 carb portions. Standard sized banana is going to be up 30 grams of carbohydrates for the banana alone. Does that make the banana bad, wrong, I can't eat it? Absolutely not. Does it mean that I want to be eating a whole banana with a bowl of cereal and milk? Well, now maybe I'm eating more carbs than my body can handle at one time. But to have a banana as part of your lunch meal with a big old green salad and grilled chicken and veggies, absolutely this 30 grams of carbs can totally fit within the context of that meal because you have all these other low carb foods that you're balancing it out. In terms of other starches, like a standard slice of bread, and I don't mean the wide pan loaves, I mean standard slice of bread, this is going to be about 15 grams of carbs, so about 1 carb serving. We have 2 slices, you're 30 carbs. Again, totally appropriate for most people for a meal. Now, if I'm eating 2 or 3 sandwiches at a time, myself, not necessary. I'm overfilling my tank. Can that construction worker who's doing manual labor for 12 hours eat 3 sandwiches? Totally. Because his fuel tank's bigger, her fuel tank's bigger, she's going to be putting that to use. Now, my favorite conversation is about vegetables. So remember, a couple slides ago, we talked about starches, and I had put in there starchy vegetables, including corn, green sweet peas, and potatoes of any kind. Well, I like to put them in the category of starches because carb for carb, they're very different than our non-starchy vegetables. And when we talk about non-starchy vegetables, I want you to think of things like lettuce, spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, onions, mushrooms, zucchini, all these other veggies. Well, when we look at servings of these, they differ in carb counts. So a half cup of corn is about 15 to 20 carbs. A half cup of a non-starchy vegetable, for example, this is spinach, is no more than 5 carbs. So serving for serving, the portion's the same, but the carbs are significantly different. You can eat 3 times the amount from these non-starchy vegetables to equate to the same amount of carb grams as a starchy vegetable. Does this make corn wrong or bad? Absolutely not. What it does mean is I need to be mindful that this portion is different than these portions. And so when I'm making up my plate, I need to be really mindful that I'm not going back for a second, third, fourth scoop of that corn just because I know those carbs are adding up a lot faster than if I went back for a second, third, or fourth scoop of broccoli, for example. Okay? As I've been mentioning, the function of our carbs is really important. So we need to be mindful of when we're eating the carbs that we're eating. So for example, if we're going to be eating a late dinner, let's say 7, 8 o'clock, we're planning to go to bed at 9, 10, and we've got our lineup of TV shows for the evening. Well, if we're going to be sitting on the couch for the rest of the night, we probably don't need to eat a carb heavy meal because all we're doing is filling up our tank and then kind of parking the car. We're not putting that to use versus I might eat more carbohydrates at breakfast than I would that dinner because at breakfast, well, I'm going to be running errands, I'm going to be at work, I'm going to be on my feet, I'm going to be doing things. I'm going to be asking my body to do more, probably needs more energy. So please be mindful about when you're eating your carbs to kind of match the function of what you think you're going to be doing for those hours following that meal. Be mindful of simple and complex. We definitely want to focus the majority of our carb intake on those complex carbohydrates. Doesn't mean we can't incorporate those simple ones. We just might want to do those in smaller portions. We might want to do those less often. We absolutely want to keep in mind that balance of if I'm going to be consuming that simple carbohydrate, I definitely want to pair it or balance it with a protein, a healthy fat, a higher fiber carb, just to kind of offset that blood sugar response. And then also that context of the meal. So where does this carbohydrate fit into my meal? What am I going to be asking my body to do? It all comes together. So really any carbohydrate can fit in because we're going to consider these other factors outside of simply, oh, a banana has carbs. Well, yes, it has carbs. How much am I having? When am I having it? What am I having with it? What am I going to be asking my body to do after I eat that banana? Or am I going to put that energy to use? So I please encourage you to really dig a little deeper past just that surface good versus bad thought. I always like to just touch on gluten. Years past, it was a lot more popular, but it's definitely still out there. And I do get it questions about, oh, if it's gluten-free, is it a better carb or is it better for me? And not always. Keeping in mind that gluten is a specific type of protein found in certain products, especially barley, rye, and wheat. And so for folks that have celiac disease, for folks that are gluten intolerant or very sensitive to it, they would have bloating, GI issues, pain, discomfort. Absolutely, for these folks, we want to be kicking gluten to the curb because the body just doesn't handle it, doesn't have the right equipment, or they've got the autoimmune disease that kind of fights against it. We want to kick gluten out of the diet. But for those of us that can tolerate gluten, I encourage you not to go all gluten-free thinking that this is a better option. Because a lot of times, especially for more processed foods, we think of things like gluten-free crackers, gluten-free breads, they are going to be using gluten-free alternatives to our wheat, rye, barley. And the two most common are rice and corn. These are highly subsidized foods and therefore make them very cheap, which makes the profit margin a little bit larger. But when we talk about things like corn and rice, these are generally not very high in protein or fiber compared to, let's say, a whole wheat loaf of bread or a whole wheat cracker. And so side by side, that gluten-free option might actually cause a more significant blood sugar spike, might leave you feeling hungrier faster because it might not have the amount of fiber or protein that a whole wheat option or a rye option would have. So again, please don't kick gluten completely out of your diet unless, of course, you need to. Be a really discerning consumer, read those labels, look at the fiber, look at the protein, and be comparing options. So carbohydrates for better health. I have, we're going to go through some of the main ones, and then I have a couple different ideas of how we can incorporate these into our breakfast, lunch, and dinner to build carbs into our diet in a healthy way that's going to promote health and hopefully kick all these ideas that carbs are bad to the curb. The whole fruits and vegetables. You will notice the word whole. I encourage everyone in here to eat their produce in the most natural whole form as possible. For example, eat the skin of your potato, eat the skin of the apple, choose the apple over the juice, choose the apple over the apple sauce. When we can eat these whole fruits and vegetables in their most natural, they just got picked from the tree way, they're going to come as the most complete package in terms of fiber content, vitamins, minerals. You're going to reduce the risk of anybody adding anything in. We'll use the applesauce example. Standard original applesauce is not just pureed apples. A lot of food manufacturers will add sugar or high fructose corn syrup, unless, of course, it's labeled as unsweetened. So if we could just eat the whole apple, it's going to be the most unadulterated version. It's going to come with that skin. It's going to add more fiber to the mix. It's going to result in greater satiety or fullness. It's going to result in a better blood sugar response. So please eat them in their whole form. So some ideas for breakfast. Maybe this is going to be whole wheat toast with some avocado being considered a fruit or a vegetable. Oatmeal, we might add some berries to it. We might add some, well, we're going to get to it, but nuts, berries and nuts, whether these be frozen berries or fresh berries. Maybe if you're a Greek yogurt type person, purchasing plain Greek yogurt and adding in frozen berries or frozen fruit the night before, allowing it to thaw overnight in your fridge. And now you're incorporating that whole fruit into that Greek yogurt. And now your blueberry yogurt is blue because there's blueberries in it, not because there's blueberry goo on the bottom. Okay? For lunch, this is a great time to either have a main entree salad or add a salad to the side of whatever you're making. Maybe you're going to do a veggie wrap, or you're going to use lettuce instead of bread to increase the amount of vegetables at your lunch. For dinner, you might roast vegetables, which are a great thing to do on the weekends for food prep. Just a big old sheet pan of all these different roasted non-starchy veggies. You can keep in the fridge all week long, continue to reheat them. Really simple and easy, adding those as sides to your dinner meals. Maybe you're going to make a big old vegetable soup on Sunday and be able to add that to your meals or have that as a full meal through the week. Cauliflower steaks. I was buying a whole head of cauliflower, cutting it up into about 1 inch thick steaks, and either grilling, roasting, baking those in place of meat. They get nice and caramelized, super tasty. Riced cauliflower is a really popular item right now. You can either make this at home yourself, you can buy this frozen in your frozen vegetable department and use this in place of white rice in your stir fries or really any recipe, casseroles, things like that to add more vegetables. Whole grains and legumes. Also not on here would be nuts and seeds. So whether this is, I'm going to do whole wheat toast, I'm going to do oatmeal, I'm going to do some bran cereal, I'm going to do a whole wheat English muffin for breakfast, adding in that whole grain. For lunch, I might use whole wheat toast or whole wheat wraps if I'm going to be making a sandwich. Adding hummus into your wrap or into your sandwich. I love to do hummus in place of other sandwich spreads, whether that be mayonnaise or actual sandwich spread. Putting hummus in there to kind of give some moisture to the sandwich, add a little bit of flavor, but then also add in those good chickpeas, those legumes. You might add some beans into your salad as your protein source instead of, let's say, ham or egg as a plant-based alternative. And then another really fun one are roasted chickpeas. You can do these at home. You can just purchase regular canned chickpeas or dried chickpeas and make those yourself. There's also more and more companies that are making low sodium, like crunchy chickpeas. They're a great addition into salads in place of croutons to add in that extra bean for that fiber and that protein source. And for dinner, maybe you're going to be doing more stir fries, and maybe we're going to use things like farro or wild rice instead of our white rice as our grain, so that we again build in that extra fiber and protein and eating that whole grain versus the more processed white varieties. Milk substitutes, and yogurt. I wouldn't very much encourage you to always read the labels on any dairy product that's not just plain, so whether that be plain milk or plain yogurt, because a lot of dairy products do have a lot of flavoring added to them, whether that be flavored yogurts, whether that be flavored milks, and these are a very sneaky source of a lot of added sugars. So that's going to increase that carb amount, but it's going to do so from a sugar perspective that's going to be able to digest more quickly versus choosing the most natural versions and then adding in your own whole fruits, your whole nuts, your whole flavorings, things like that. And then the one thing I definitely want to remind folks of is that Greek yogurt versus your traditional regular yogurt does have 2 to 3 times more protein per the same serving. So the carbs might be pretty equivalent, but that Greek yogurt is going to have gone through extra straining or filtration, and that's going to really concentrate the amount of protein in that serving. And so 6 ounces of regular yogurt versus 6 ounces of Greek yogurt, well, that Greek yogurt with more protein is going to keep you fuller longer, it's going to stay in your stomach longer, it's going to digest more slowly, help to reduce the glycemic index, hopefully help to prevent you from getting the munchies or getting hungrier sooner than you would like, just because you're adding in that extra protein source. Again, please always read those nutrition labels and make sure you know what you're buying. Because again, original anything, I see this a lot on nut milks or non-dairy milks, whether it's the almond or soy, whatever's out there. Original doesn't always mean that it doesn't have added sugars to it. So we definitely want to look for unsweetened varieties, or always read those labels, the nutrition facts, as well as the ingredients, to make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting, so that the carbs that we get from these dairy products are not just the added sugars, but they're the basic whole, hey, I'm just going to have a glass of milk. And another thing to comment on, carbohydrates aside, is going to be fat content. For overall heart health, we really want to focus the majority of our fat intake on plant-based foods. In the same way that we're talking about carbs are plant-based, we want to choose the most wholesome varieties for our types of fats that we consume in the diet, because our body needs fat. It's good for us as long as we're choosing the best kinds. And research shows that if we can get the majority of our dietary fat from plant-based sources such as nuts and seeds and olives and avocados, again, these things that are growing out of the ground, these plants, it's really going to be better for overall heart health. And so for things like yogurt, purchasing a non-fat or a low-fat yogurt and then adding in slivered almonds, adding in these other plant-based sources so that you get to control the type of fat that you're consuming, but still get it as part of a well-balanced meal. All right, now with our 15 or so minutes left here, I don't know, I didn't see any questions come through, Sarah, on the chat box.
Nope, me neither.
Okay, cool, I didn't miss any. Does anybody have any questions? I know you guys have some. What processes faster, soda or orange juice? Oh, I love this question. They're both the same. So when we look at liquid carbohydrates, so whether this is you putting honey in your tea or your coffee, you drinking orange juice, you drinking regular soda, liquid carbs convert to blood sugar faster than anything else aside from just straight glucose tabs or glucose gel. This is why folks with diabetes are recommended to drink a little bit of orange juice if they happen to have a low blood sugar, because it only takes about 10 to 15 minutes for that OJ to go from your lips to your bloodstream and be converted to blood sugars and start raising those blood sugars. So when it comes to those carbs, again, whole carbs, let's try to eat them, chew them, eat them in their most whole form, eat the orange over the orange juice, because those liquid carbs are going to turn into blood sugar faster than their whole counterparts. Now, that's not to say that orange juice does not come chock full of other nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that a Coke wouldn't. But in terms of blood sugar control, they're both pretty much the same, and you'd be much better off eating the orange, chewing the orange, getting the fiber that comes with that whole orange versus just drinking the juice. And please, nobody ask about the pulp. It doesn't count. You got to eat the orange. You got to chew it. Will you address protein powders, soy or whey? Good. So I'm a whole food person. I really am a big proponent of focusing on whole foods in their most natural form. Protein powders are a processed food. In terms of the carbohydrate conversation, different protein powders are going to come with different add-ins. Okay, Mary, I saw that one too. I'll come to that. So please always read the labels. In terms of protein powder, you are better off choosing just straight, unsweetened, no flavoring. If you're going to be adding that into, let's say, yogurt, you're going to be adding that into oatmeal. For folks that are asking based on smoothies, I would encourage you to chew all the things that you're putting into your blender rather than using your blender. Reason being, really focusing on that glycemic index, really focusing on slowing down digestion. When you throw all those things into your blender, you're now having the motor do the work that your body doesn't have to, versus you chewing all of those things that you're putting into the blender. Now your body has to do further digestion, further churning, further breakdown. And so you're more likely to see a higher blood sugar response, a more immediate blood sugar response when you drink a smoothie versus eat those things. I saw somebody ask about raisins. So I hear this a lot, that raisins are bad because there's so much sugar in raisins. Well, just as a reality check, raisins have the same amount of sugar as grapes do. You've just removed all the water, so the serving's gotten a lot smaller. Quarter cup of raisins is the exact same thing as 2 cups of grapes. We've just sucked all the water out of the grapes, and you're left with the skins, the sugar, and the vitamins and minerals within. So the thing about raisins is really portion control. A serving of raisins is 1 to 2 tablespoons, comes in at about 15 to 20 grams of carbohydrates. Please work that into the balance of the whole meal. I saw somebody ask about how many carbs you're supposed to eat for the day. There is not a one size fits all. Everybody's needs are different. Going back to the example of myself versus that construction worker, that person's needs are going to be significantly higher than me, sitting at a desk all day. So that would be a reason to work individually with a dietitian to figure out what your needs are based on your age, your gender, your weight, your height, your activity level, your other chronic diseases. Within diabetes, It's more important that you focus on even distribution of carbohydrate intake across the day rather than a per day bank. The reason being, let's say that you were given 30 carbs per meal as your budget. Well, if it were Friday and you know you were going to a fish fry and you said, okay, I'm just going to eat egg whites for breakfast and I'm just going to eat a salad for lunch so that I can save up all 90 carbs for my fish fry at night. Well, what do you think is going to happen to your blood sugars after you eat that fish fry and all 90 carbs at one time? Your blood sugars are much more likely to go sky high than had you eaten 30, 30, 30. It is important that we evenly distribute our carb intake across the day. Sarah, I saw so many come in, but those were the only two that I caught. Can you read some of the other ones?
Yes. Ideas for low carb snacks in the evening. Someone has diabetes and is looking for some ideas.
Vegetable, whether that be carrot sticks, red bell peppers with some hummus, celery and peanut butter, veggies, veggies, veggies. Another option would be something like a serving of nuts if you want another crunchy option. So whether that's a quarter cup of walnuts or almonds, just kind of munching on those. My clients also might do a piece of low-fat string cheese as a low-carb option, but anytime you can incorporate more vegetables. In terms of evening snacks, I encourage you to be very mindful of if you're snacking because it's a habit and we've always had an evening snack, or because we're physically hungry, our belly's empty, we don't want to go to bed and feel uncomfortable, wake up in the middle of the night with our stomach, in knots because we're super, super hungry. Please be mindful that that evening snack really does serve a physical function, not just a, oh, well, I've always had a snack and I'm just going to continue to do that. If your body doesn't need it, if it's not empty, if your stomach's not hungry, it might be a good opportunity to maybe save a couple calories or save a blood sugar the next morning, if you generally do gravitate towards those higher carb snacks. So please be mindful about portions, choosing lower carb options like I had suggested, and then ultimately, do I need to snack because my body needs it, or am I just doing it because I want it?
Is milk better than cheese?
In terms of carbs, milk does have more carbohydrates than cheese does because cheese is aged and because of the way cheese is processed. A lot of the lactose in the original milk product is removed when we have our end game of cheese. So a slice of cheese or a piece of string cheese is going to have 0 to 1 gram of carbohydrate. More fresh cheese, we think of something like cottage cheese, a half cup serving of that, generally about 4 to 5 grams of carbohydrate versus a serving of milk, an 8-ounce glass is going to be 12 grams of carbohydrate, and that's just the amount of lactose that is originally there and then processed out.
How do you make healthy veggies taste less bitter?
Oh, it depends on the vegetable. Something like red and yellow bell peppers, I think that those taste sweet. A lot of times, if you cook them, whether that be roasting, steaming, stir frying, kind of breaking down some of those initial cell walls can help to break that bitterness. It's one of the biggest reasons why, if you've ever heard folks say, oh, kale's gross, it's super bitter, but then once it's massaged or it's cooked, not really cooked, just literally like you get your hands in there and you manipulate it, what you're basically doing is breaking down those really, really strong cell walls in that plant that can create that bitter sensation or taste. So by breaking it down, you're breaking down that bitterness. Also be mindful of seasonings and herbs that you're adding. Really add in a lot of flavor. Fresh herbs, rosemary, sage, thyme, whatever your preferences are. I really love salt seasoning blends, whether that's Mrs. Stash or Penzeys. Costco has a really great no salt seasoning blend. It tastes delicious. I put it on everything. Just ways to kind of build in that extra flavor, but generally vegetables will taste less bitter to you if they are cooked.
And then is it harmful to flavor hot coffee with unsweetened almond milk?
Cut out a little bit. Did you ask, is it unhealthy to sweeten coffee with unsweetened almond milk?
You got it.
Okay. No, not necessarily. No. Please make sure that it is truly unsweetened, because even like unsweetened vanilla can sometimes have more added sugars. So as long as it's just the straight almond milk, putting a little bit of that in there to kind of maybe cut the bitterness of your coffee rather than a full sugar creamer or something that's going to have a lot of artificial sweeteners in it, totally fine option. Another consideration for folks that like to flavor their coffee naturally is consider adding ground cinnamon to your coffee grinds before you make it. Because as that water comes through and makes your coffee, you're going to have that essence of cinnamon there that's going to add a little natural sweet flavor without adding the sugar. Is that it? Oh, I can't hear you. Oh no.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, that's all I'm seeing in the chat. If anyone has any other questions for Tatiana. Otherwise, as always, we will follow up with the link for today's program if you want to review it or share it with anyone. For those that weren't able to join us, they'll be getting the link. And then if you're interested in future classes, I would encourage everyone to go to our Pro Healthcare website. We have a e-newsletter that you can sign up for. If you click on the classes and events kind of button on our website, you'll find prompts to sign up for something called Pro Wellness. And that's really a great way for you to find out upcoming nutrition classes and other classes that we might be offering, all of course virtual right now. So I would encourage you to do that if you haven't already done so. As always, Tatiana, thank you so much for your expertise today and sharing with us your knowledge.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing everyone next time. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.